Okay. So thank you everyone for coming. For those who are watching it on YouTube as well. So we have 2 talks for today. Yeah. Weird to have it in real life and streaming. But so basically, for those who so we have a Discord channel. We might try to socialize there as well, but we are plenty here already after a year of remote. So happy to see so many people here actually. So we are streaming on YouTube. Discord should have probably set the on the projector as well, but the slides that I'm streaming. But yeah, so we want to give or say thanks to our hosts today, Onion Space. Big thanks for having us. Yes. So who is going to be the first one? Ivan. Yeah. Yes. So Ivan, if you are ready, I would be ready to give up the stream to you. So I am.
Okay. Hi everybody. So I hope sound works and you hear me in the streaming. So I'm Ivan. I came today from Hamburg to give a short talk about actually 2 libraries that I made. So general talk will be about Domo. It's for automatic validation of application models in microservices setup, and another library, you will notice it during the talk, but I wouldn't elaborate much because it's maybe a big another topic. So so I'm starting my presentation, and today basically I would like to talk about errors and invalid state. So when we have microservices set up or standalone application, there are several typical sources of mistakes in the application. So it can be network, it can be databases of files, and it can be basically the application itself due to mistakes because we're humans. And before going into the microservices and the whole fancy stuff, so yeah, just a second, I need to update the screen. So is it working? Okay, so we have some technical problems now, and we're trying to make the screen sharing working so folks can see what we see here on site. Here it is. Yeah. Yes, seems so.
Never comes to this page.
So what can you repeat this, please? Okay.
And then I think properties.
Okay.
So can you choose a different?
No.
Start your
Okay.
You could do a window capture instead.
Yeah, sure. So,
Click on the camera, okay, I can't really zoom to the second to there. Zoom into there. And then add a new capture.
okay, now it seems working. Okay, so
You drag it, make it big so it's
physical light.
it
Yeah,
does slide,
good.
so you have to do it.
Okay.
Okay, now it's perfect.
So, do you see it now? Okay, so we have some delay. So, yes, super nice. So today we have we have not only the meetup talks, but how to configure your OBS translation. So you saw it. And now let's return back to the library, so Domo. Let me start again. So today I would like to talk about mistakes and the main sources of the mistakes for any application written in basically any language. Can be a network input, database and file input, or mistakes in business logic that basically brings application to a wrong state. So before going into the microservices, I would like to concentrate on a single app, a single Elixir app. So how this state usually looks like. Usually in Elixir app you have state represented by a structure, and Elixir is very flexible and very nice and powerful language. At the same time, it allows you to have not only expected numbers like in this example, but any kind of input you may imagine. So, and this can be a source of a mistake because this kind of input is usually unhandled and it leads to crashes. So basically Domo library addresses this problem with validating data for structs against its type. So when you use Domo in a struct, it adds several functions to it, constructor and ensuring functions. And basically, when you run this function with struct fields, it validates these fields again, just type of the struct, and then it checks the values with precondition function attached to the type. With precond macro, as you can see on the right side, for ID type, we have precond function checking the range of the value. So how it looks like when you call these added functions. So basically, when you call the constructor functions with valid input, it returns you the constructed struct back. And if the valid and the input is not valid, then we have some errors. Here you can see we have ID of 500, and this is the first error saying that, okay, this value for field ID is wrong, and it should be non-negative integer, that is correct, but at the same time it should be a true value from the precondition function, and we can see that it's basically 500 not fit into this range. And the second mistake is that value 0 for approved limit is not matching to positive integer type. That is obvious. So precondition functions expected to return either true or false value or OK or error tuple. So how it works? Basically, during the compile time, Domo generates a so-called type ensurer module for every structure using Domo from its type spec. And then adds these constructor and ensurer functions that basically delegates the work to this type ensurer. So you can find the generated code always in this build folder. So it's no secret here, just you can open this folder and find whatever type ensurer module source code was generated. So now I would like to make a short demo of a standard JSON parsing problem with Domo. So, folks, I can't ask the audience in the internet, but maybe they can write something in Discord channel. But I can ask you here, definitely. So, have you ever worked with contentful CMS? Okay, so we have some people here work with contentful. I'd like to say that this is a headless CMS that basically generates you a JSON output that you can then use in your product for displaying the data from the CMS. And I've got the standard example file called product catalog from Contentful. And as you can see, this is about 3,000 line file, and its structure is basically it has some sections, it has entries, and it has assets. So basically we have entry as kind of a field set with a product name and image, and this image is referencing the asset in the same file. So it's basically a reference ID. And if I open these assets here, so that would be an image itself with given ID here and some URL to the actual picture. So my goal in this example is to build a small internal model, core model for my imaginary application that would be a product. You can see it has name, slug, image, price, tags, and updated. And image would be another struct called core product image that has some URI dimensions and byte size. So, but unfortunately, the structure of contentful JSON file doesn't give me this directly. So I need somehow to assemble this final core model from the contentful. To do so, I would go with a product catalog that basically reflects the shape of the JSON. And I would have image assets and products entries there. And basically, image asset would be reflecting the part of JSON that is for image, and product entry for product. I would also, during the decoding of JSON, flatten a bit this structure, because as you can see, it's not like on the same level, but you can see that title is also wrapped in US map, and yeah, so it's basically a nested JSON that I would like to flatten a bit. So I do it with a nest-true library that I also made and released yesterday. So it's for simpler decoding of the JSON and putting it into nested struct. So the main code is here. Yeah? Yeah, sure, I can make it bigger. So the main code is here. So this is a parse function that reads the file and then decodes the JSON into the map, and then shapes this map into the catalog structure. And then basically to product list, this function is basically assembles the final product list of product structures. So putting image and this product together and returning a list. So if I run this with a valid file, so I can parse valid file and parse valid file, and I can see that in valid file I have 1, 2, 3, 4 products basically, and this is a core model already returned by this toProductList function. But if I go with invalid file, and I can assure you that there is a mistake somewhere in between these 3,000 lines in that, then I would have no any error at the moment, because I use struct to construct the internal fields, internal product structure, and put these fields into it. So if I parse invalid file, that I would get the same output. And somewhere here I have a mistake. So my goal now is to find this mistake. So what I can do, because I use Domo in all of these modules, like in core product structure, I use Domo. Then I have this constructor that validates the fields against this type. And so if I replace this struct here with product new fields, then I should get a crash on the invalid file if I have something wrong in my fields. So I'm running this, and yes, I have a crash. So what's happening here? This product new function failed with the following error. So it says that the image is wrong, and this value is expected to be either image or new type, but the underlying error is that URI should have both host and path specified. And one of the pieces of this 3000 line file have no host or path specified for image. And basically, now the question is how to find this place in JSON where the mistake is. So to do so, I going to lift this validation to this level of parsing JSON, and I'm going basically to validate the JSON model in the first place to see the error closer to its origin. So how I can do this? Luckily, I have Domo used also in JSON model. So basically, here I have all basically image assets. I have type for it, and I can just, because I know that the error with URI, then I can say that I would like to not to have like basic URI here, but I would like to have image URI to to be referenced from this JSON model, image assets module. So to make this short, I would like to go with basically validation of this JSON model. And how I'm going to do that, I'm going to say, yeah, so product catalog, and JSON reply product catalog, okay. So I'm putting it here, and I'm saying I would like to insert type and of this catalog. So basically, you can see now that I have this line here that should return error if I have this image on the JSON model level wrong. So I would like to recompile this and restart parsing of the invalid file. So, and basically it says, okay, so I should have ensured to type okay here. So, sorry, it's my bad. Let's do it again. So I'm recompiling, and I'm parsing invalid file again. So I got an error that's saying, okay, so you have invalid image asset, and the most important thing here is that this invalid image asset is in the list at index 6 in the JSON reply product catalog module. So I'm basically, and it says the same error. Why it's invalid? Because URL should have both host and path specified. So now I'm opening this invalid file and going to this asset to check it out, what's going on there. So I'm opening invalid catalog that I was parsing. And now I'm going to assets, and I'm opening the 7th assets because we have 0 indexes, 0 starting indexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and here I'm going to open URI, and I guess you already can see the error here. So it shouldn't be like this, and it should have two slashes before to make this thing a host, and the rest to make it a path. Because only with one backslash it's the full path, but no host in this line. So now I'm going to parse this invalid file again, and voila, I have returned the correct JSON model and then converted to my internal core model. So, questions so far about this example?
I have a question.
Okay.
If you like to have, I mean, right now it looks like the bug locally, but if you want to use it automatically, probably you need to expose errors in some structure, not strings.
Yeah.
Don't you think that it will be more useful? I mean, right now you just read this text, and
Yeah.
if automatically you can have,
Yeah.
for example, structures.
Yeah, sure. You're saying that it's a very big output of the error message. I would like to show it in the next example, how it can be shorter and for use. So please be patient. I will return to it later. Any other questions?
I have a question maybe to the way you define the types.
Okay.
Isn't there like a JSON type specification and not? Do you have any relation to that, or maybe you can say something on
Yeah, sure. It's possible to validate this in various ways. So after parsing, or you can do it before, just comparing JSON to the schema, and there are some libraries on PaxPM for that, so you can use schema to validate it. But the interesting thing here that I showed to you that it was a dependency inversion. So this image asset and URI inside of it was in the core model, and this rule from the core module that this URI should have both host and path, that then was referenced from the JSON model. So it's kind of a dependency on the core, and for this purpose, it's a better way to do this. So you can basically link the JSON schema to the core model of your application. It doesn't work like that, basically.
Yeah.
So, okay, I would like to return to the presentation, and yeah, so Domo, as you may notice, it respects dependencies. So, for example, if you have a purchase order that references a line item type, and line item type that references some kind of amount type in the shared kernel, then if you change the shared kernel type to something like that, then during compilation time, Domo will recompile type insurers for all depending structs. So now let's go to microservices. In the title of this talk, I mentioned that Domo works in the microservices setting. And what I mean under that, I mean that if you have a shared kernel module with some types defined, then you can share this module across various apps in your microservices setup. And then if you use Domo, these types would be respected and validated. So as on the screen you can see, there are two microservices, boarding microservice and cargo's microservice, and both types can reference flight number in the shared kernel. So, and for example, these can be two independent projects, and you can share this file via Git or by other means and have unified flight numbers across these two microservices. So, I would like to go for the second example, how it works in microservices setup. And for this, I will show you this application. It's artificial flight center application for a small aviation company. And you have two parts here, boarding service and cargo service. So we have them on the one page, but at the same time, internally, this boarding service is represented by one Phoenix context and one repo, and cargo service is represented by another Phoenix context and independent repo. So it's basically supported by different databases, these two parts. So what I'm going to do, I'm going basically to add something here and add passenger, and I get this error that flight number should be of specific format. So this is implemented by Domo, and I would like to show you how in the source code. So this is the second example. Here in the left hand side you can see the boardings context and passenger change set. So basically this passenger change set, it's ecto schema and type defined for it, and you can see that flight is referencing the type in shared kernel module. And in the change set function, we have this validate type that provided by Domo. So as the last step of this execution of this change set, this validate type function basically compares whether the values for these fields matching this type spec or not. So in the shared kernel, I should close this now. In the shared kernel, you can see that flight number is basically defined as a string, but at the same time it has a precondition function attached, so that is validate flight number, and that returns error flight number should be of a specific format. So that's the origin from where it goes to the change set and then back to the form. And as well as we have the cargo's context and the shipment schema there. So it's basically also ecto schema, and it also has a type defined, and it also have a flight field referencing flight number from the shared kernel. So, and we use the same validate type function from Domo here to have these flight numbers validated. So it means that if, for example, I enter correct flight number here, and I enter names, and I enter the seat, then it would work. And if I enter the same flight number in another microservice and add some baggage here and enter the weight, so it would work either. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to support bigger flight numbers. So if I'm going with some number 7 here, one more, it would be error already because it should have only 4 numbers. But I'm going to extend it to the 5 numbers. How I would do that? And as you may see, it works the same here. So I have the same error here. So I'm going to change the shared kernel. I'm going to add another validate flight number function here with 5 characters supported, and say that it should be of 4 or 5x format. So Domo supports Phoenix hot reload, so if I press button now, it should work. So it's hot reloading, and it doesn't work. So let me check why. So can you say louder?
Problem is that on the other remaining the other version.
Yeah, that's true. So that's simple. We should enter other fields and then it should work. Yeah. So now it's working. So thank you, it was easy. So and it works here too. So if I add something else, then it's now supported, and if obviously I enter another number, then it would give me this error message that it supports only 4 or 5. And it would work for both microservices, as I will demonstrate in a second. So it would work the same here, because it's a shared module between these two. So, and another thing, Domo supports not only these shared modules and precondition functions for specific fields, but it also supports uh, the precondition for the struct type itself. So for example, let's say I have new requirement that I need to enter kilograms only for passenger baggage and enter some boxes and bags and barrels for commercial cargo. And can it mix that up? So at the moment I can mix. So if I enter some flight and say passenger baggage, I can say big bags 5 and and big bags 5, and it would allow me to add these. So okay, passenger have 5 big bags. You know, somehow he feeds these industrial bags into cabin or something, so that I have new requirements that it's not allowed. I'm going to do this with Domo. So by adding the precondition function to this cargo, to this shipment schema, I have a type here, so I'm incrementing this precondition, and so validate shipment function basically checks if I have commercial cargo, and if it's not matching kind of Unix, bags, boxes, etc., I should bring error message back. And the same for passenger baggage. If it's not kilograms, I'm giving the error message back. Otherwise, I return OK from this precondition function, and if it's OK, then Domo just passes the valid struct back. So now I'm going to repeat the same, so pressing the button, and I've got this error that baggage shipment must be measured in kilograms, so I can't add big bags anymore. So I can only add kilograms, maybe 15, so it works. And the same for commercial cargo. If I'd like to add kilograms, it would say no. First it would say that I need to have commercial cargo shipment ID here. And then it would say, sorry, you should have only bags, boxes, etc. So I can say, okay, 5 bags for this commercial cargo. And it works. So that's basically how you can add domain constraints and validate domain constraints with Domo on the struct level itself. So, any questions for this?
I'm not sure if like Domo but in general, it moves the kind of validation into the application model. And I think I'm not sure like how this is probably put together, but if you run this validation only when you state the database, not when you reach from the database, you might have a potentially you might have a problem where like pretty record, because like when you are adding this requirement, you have in the history of the database, you have a record which is no longer there.
Yeah.
What would be like the approach to use with this? I'm not sure if it's, I guess it's not much the question to the library, but like how do you do that?
Okay. Well.
Not straight to an application when you have.
Yeah, so you mean that, for example, we have this longer flight number here, and the validation changes that we not allow this anymore in the code, but we have it in the database.
More like with the wrong cargo thing.
Or with this wrong cargo thing that, is here. So the answer here, it depends. So it depends on what would you like to do with these errors. So basically Domo gives you the tool, so you can use the new constructor function or ensure type functions that would obviously return you an error when you have invalid data not matching the type anymore. But how to handle this error, it's in your hands. So usually these decisions are planned before, such dramatic changes in the flight numbers or something, and you can see this error quicker and then migrate your database, for example, or come up with some other idea about changing the code. So maybe you can postpone the change of the code until you update your database. So interesting thing here is that Domo gives you fast feedback. So if the type not matches data anymore, you will know about it as fast as possible. Any other questions? Okay, so then I'm going to return back for a while again, and just to wrap up, to say that Domo library validates application models to conform to the type spec and attach precondition functions to these types across microservices setting, and it adds some constructor and ensurer functions to the struct, and it supports customer messages from the precondition functions we saw, and it validates defaults of the struct during compile time. So if you messed up with default values, then Domo will tell you about it during compilation. It integrates with Ecto, supports Phoenix hot reload. So basically, so yeah, you can find these examples and other information for following this link.
Very interesting. I'm also not sure how it will be used so far, because I haven't actually looked at that. But we are super impressed with all the code development.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks a lot. So yeah. So then I'm stopping the translation to hand over back to Kuba.
Hey there, this is Dominic. I'm gonna wait a little bit just to confirm that the YouTube is running. Is it? Okay, so I'm getting thumbs up. So thank you so much for those guys present here, and thanks Ivan for the presentation, and thank you for those guys listening online. So this is kind of a continuation of a talk I had earlier in March, and this is about making your live view apps run natively on iOS and Android. I was previously talking about how to make it run natively on Windows, Linux, and macOS, like desktop applications. But now we want to go one step further. This is short about me. You can reach me on Twitter, and I'm twittering usually, but I'm also always in the Elixir Slack, So I hang out there. There's a desktop room if you have questions about that, or how to run your application on Android. You can also just shoot a message there. We're here in Berlin, doing with my company actually a software that also uses exactly the stuff we are doing here, open source, and I'm presenting. So we're actually doing mobile applications, and that's what we use it for in production. So that was a stretch goal that was May. I said that, and they were still very unclear, like how can we actually bring an application to mobile. There's a lot of like small VMs, like kind of Erlang VMs available, but so at-home VM was one that I looked at because it was really small, but also does Beam, but we ended up doing it very differently. So there's a demo here, but I want to show you the demo actually from the Xcode Studio. That's also the reason, that's the only reason why I have a Mac today, so I can show you from Xcode. Do you want to replace? Yeah, I want to replace my to-do app. And if I do that and start this, then there should be the simulator here. Now this runs, and we pop up an app. And we actually have a log. So this is an Elixir app. It's a simple live view application. It's using live view for all the interactions. We see actually in the log here that there's a couple, like there's log messages. This is all coming directly from Erlang. There is a layer running right now that bridges between the native world and the Erlang world. And so this app that we're seeing here is exactly the same app that we can also run in the normal, in quotes, normal environment of Erlang. If we go to the desktop example app, and I run this here. So this is now running the macOS version of that, which is like a macOS native application. And so we see that this is exactly the same. It's the exact same source code, the same that's running it.
On the to-do list and on the Mac app,
Well,
just like to see what it logs. Because on the mobile, it logs quite some lines about weeks digits stuff. So do you translate weeks widgets on mobile, or do you do this on both versions?
yeah, we do that only on the mobile. Exactly. So let me jump back to the slide.
So on the Mac, it's like that page that's embedded into the window.
Yeah.
Okay, and on mobile, it's weeks widgets.
It's both. It's both WX widgets. So WX widgets we're using. I have a slide on parts of that. So let's dive into that because it's a really good question here, I think. No, that's not the right button here. That's the right button. So I'm just jumping here. So what we're doing right now is we use in the mobile app, we're using WX widgets because we use the same actually in the desktop. So in desktop, we have with WX widgets access to a web view. So we have a native web view on macOS, and Linux and Windows, they all have the web view component. So we do WX widgets, which is the same tool you have maybe seen when you create like an observer window. That's also WX widgets. So we're using that to create the window, and then we're using that to open a web view, and then put actually the live view inside. Now on mobile, we don't have windows and we don't have web view. What we do instead, we open on the native side, just behind, in the local space here, we have some flowers just in front of this box here, but there's a web view component. In iOS, it's WK web view. In Android, it's just web view. And that is what we're opening from the native part of the application. So this is the green part is a native part. And then that connects from what I'm calling the bridge. And the bridge is actually a WX widgets drop-in replacement because we don't have that on mobile. And it's just taking out these calls that we need, like actually showing a URL to the web view and redirecting it up here so that we show the actual web view. And this is also what we saw in the log, just churning through all here. These bridge calls, these are all bridge WX widgets calls. So they're not actually going to WX widgets, they're making it through the bridge here on the other side and being handled. So going back to that normal flow. So I want to talk about iOS a bit for a second because it's very different. It's a very unique flavor of like an operating system. The main difference with all other deployments is it does not have shared libraries. So this idea of a .so file that you link and ship doesn't exist. And so what we did for the Android app of just like basically packaging standard Erlang, but putting it into zips and putting it a part of the app doesn't work here because there's no way you can load a dynamic library. This also affects NIFs. Like if you have NIFs, they're by default compiled with shared libraries. This concept doesn't exist on iOS. Also, it doesn't have executables. So basically, you cannot ship EPMD. Okay, we don't need that. But you can also not ship the Erl child setup, which is like an internal helper that Erlang is using every time it needs to open a port. The only thing we can ship is really one big binary blob. That's our application. No extra executable files apart from that. And iOS is actually 4 platforms. So it's 2 platforms on the Macs as simulators, and then 2 more platforms, very old iPhones, and then younger iPhones right now. So we want to compile for all of them. And what is kind of unique is in iOS, you combine all of these platforms together into an XC framework. That's what they call it. And then it's like one package. You bring it into a project and you get these binaries. So for that, I had to drill into OTP and change OTP a bit. So we're allowing static compilation of the whole Erlang VM into a not .so file, but into a .a file. So something that we can statically link into iOS application. That means it gets merged with all the rest of your binary code and is part of it instead of being something extra. That change also affects the NIFs. Actually, Erlang has some support for NIFs already to be statically linked in. It's pretty like arcane, and I don't know how often this code is actually being used, but it's there and it has been there for a long time. The problem is this code did never work with Elixir because the way it's being translating NIFs to static files, it's converting the module name into a C function call. And Elixir module names have basically always a dot in them. And so a C function cannot have a dot in its name. And so this did break apart, had to make some small changes there as well. Cool thing is they actually, I did this PR, it went in, and actually now if you look at master of Erlang, that's already in. And few people know, so I want to highlight this here because I had a similar discussion when talking about Windows. If you go to the Erlang OTP repo, they have CI running. And so you go to the repo, you click on any commit you're curious about on the green question mark, and you can actually get the most recent build. You can like a bleeding edge Windows build, and now, because there's also a CI, you can also get a bleeding edge iOS framework build for OTP. And then you drag that XC framework into your project and you can call it. We talked about this a little bit. So it looks very, very similar on iOS and Android. So I put it's Xcode or Android Studio. We have basically a content view. That's what I'm mixing up. Content view is what iOS is calling it, and main activity is what Android is calling it. We have the web view over here. We talked about that. We have both a bridge file. It's doing the same. One is Swift, one is Kotlin. And they are talking over here over TCP IP to Erlang. So what happens is we start Erlang within the same process, and we set up an environment variable. We call that the bridge port. And this, during startup of Elixir Desktop, that's checking, is there this kind of environment variable? Oh, it's there. So I take this port number here and use that to talk back to the native app. And this is where we can then reach the bridge and communicate with it. And via the bridges and this call coming in, there should be a new window, or there's some action happening. Please react to that. And one thing of these is that we actually, once the Phoenix Live View comes up, can tell the web view, hey, show this now. So this is being communicated via here, that this connection is being established. And that shows our to-do app. That's pretty straightforward. So I would like everyone to get started with that as soon as possible. Like, grab this and make your iOS applications right now, because this is in master of OTP, but it's not in any stable builds yet. So it's kind of tricky to get this running. The main problem in getting this running is that when you compile locally the application, you have to compile it with the same version of Erlang and Elixir that is embedded up here in the runtime. So this is like you download the example that actually has a binary blob. It's like 15 megabytes. That's like a complete Erlang deployment for iOS. So you don't have to cross-compile anything. You can just go. But if you compile now locally your application and you link against a completely different Erlang version, then you will get a problem with some libraries. Specifically, the crypto library is always one that has issues, because the crypto library is actually a NIF. And so the Erlang code, especially in newer builds, tries to call a function that in the runtime that's built in here doesn't exist, right? So the NIF, the crypto NIF, tries to call something that's implemented in C, and you have two different Erlang versions, and then it doesn't work. And so it's a bit tricky to get this running on your system, because you have to install this kind of beta version, this development version, and compile your application with that. Same with NIFs. The steps are actually quite easy. If you use curl, you can probably do the same as ASDF. I'm always using curl. So you build from Git. This is actually one of our repos, and there's like a beta which we are basing stuff off, and that's like the one that compiles on iOS and that compiles everywhere, and also on like the Windows changes and that they're all there. As soon as there is like a stable build from OTP based on that, maybe it's going to be 24.2 or potentially OTP 25, we will see. We can change this to like actually point to a stable build, and then it's going to be much easier. This is the repo. You can go there. I talked about the steps. So real quick, you need to build that custom version of OTP for your local machine. You install Xcode, install brew. There's a bit like there's like Xcode specific things, like there's dependencies. For that you need Carthage, that's being used in that world. You fork, build the dependencies, and then run the app. When you start this way, I think the first things you want to do is, after you have cloned the repo, you go ahead and actually make the application point somewhere else. The wrapper of the iOS application is really like a shell, independent of the Elixir application. So what the example app is doing in code, and I can just jump back here. So I go here to To-Do app, and then I'm already here in the build phases. In the build phases is actually a script, and this script, what it does, it basically just builds an Elixir application. So I scroll down here, and we going mixed step, we clone a repo, we go into that repo, do mixed steps get, then we get the assets, we deploy the assets, and at the end of this execution, we zip actually a release into a zip file, and this zip file is in a certain location of this app. It's right here where I'm pointing at, and this is the zip file that then is basically extracted on boot and is being executed on. So if you do this, you want to turn this into your own, you have to change this part here into your own repo, whatever your live view application is that you want to use. That's straightforward. Application name and icon, I think that's pretty straightforward. Those are part of the Swift wrapper. They're pretty unique, again, to Apple, how they do it. They have different sizes and they allow different kind of animations, but it's quick to do. Adding features, there's like one hint here. Some of the native features, like you want to have one app open the other app or share like a file from one app to the other app. Those are very, very different done on iOS and on Android. So at the current time, the best way to do it is to do it on the Swift or on the Kotlin part, and then open the interaction via the bridge. There's like getting that to be under one umbrella that has one API is extremely complicated. I don't think I will get there anytime soon.
It's possible to call your Swift function from within Elixir.
Yeah, so exactly. So basically what we have is this, this is a bridge. And the bridge is being executed every time right now when you do a WX widgets call. And there's I can show the bridge repo that has like from a lot of WX widgets functions wrappers here, and everything going there is just sent via the bridge. But you can send more there. Or what I'm trying to do is I try to reuse WX widgets logic when it exists. For example, this get OS description Like I'm just using that function. Obviously, it does something else on Windows and on Linux, but here I'm also returning some description of like this is an iOS device and what version it is. So if there's a fit, I try to use that. If there's no fit at all, like we're sharing an intent, like an Android, for example, to open something, then you just have to use a new function call. But you can handle it here as well and call whatever Swift function code that you want.
So like, do you have to modify Reach for that, or do you just like write your own code and like link it with Reach, and then we'll be able to discover like this other function?
Yeah, right now the bridge is just a file copied really into the example project. Mm-hmm. So you can go there and make it your own. It's also because it's still very early. When it becomes more mature and has more meat, right now it's really simple as well. I think then it makes more sense to have it in a central Git and like use more of reusability, more sharing. Right now it's just make it your own. You can make changes to it. But if you have good ideas or experience also how to do that best in like a Swift environment or a Kotlin environment, be my guest. There's definitely a lot of areas in Android and also on iOS that I had to learn about here. I'm by far no iOS or Android developer. Different here in the logs, we saw that iOS prints it to the debug screen. That's nice. On Android, you have to find them. They're a bit deeply hidden in the private storage of the application, but you can also get to them. There's a log file then that we are producing, and you get all the Erlang output. As a last finding, like after going all this way around that we had to do for iOS and do it so different than for Android of linking everything statically, actually, now that we have it, I think this is a better way because it also improves the startup time. So there's no external files that need to be loaded at runtime that we need to iterate or search for. It's just like everything is in one blob. And so the iOS version of this actually boots quicker because it doesn't need to load dynamic libraries. So we might, in another iteration, just go back and do the same for Android. And maybe even for Windows and Linux. Because they're having the idea of having a deployment, especially on Windows, for example, that is just a single .exe is much nicer than having like exe that is a small wrapper and then you have like thousands of Erlang files. So it's actually not that bad. I think it's pretty cool. This is the status. So it's MIT lessons is going to stay Windows, Linux, Mac OS, now Android and iOS. I will keep breaking the APIs because I think just it's necessary as we evolve and see more additions to it and grow. And then packaging bundling is an issue. I say here it will come. There's a little start to it because on Android and iOS, packaging is obviously built in, right? If you create this just from Xcode, you compile that, you have a package already. That's the packaging. It's different on Windows, Linux, Mac OS. There you have to have another thought about how do you package that. You have an installer or whatnot. And signing, that's like the last step. Then also for those OSs, you have to take care of that yourself. But off you go to the shop. You can start selling it. Yeah.
One question that maybe it's too early, but have you looked into the Apple approval process? Do they approve Erlang with iOS?
We have not gone through that yet, but I would really like to go, for example, with a sample app, just through that one time. So I'm curious. I don't think there's anything really that where it's non-compliant, really, because whether it's a JavaScript app or Erlang app, there's no big difference, and I don't see why there should be a difference.
Well, at some point they had in their guidelines that like you can't bring your own scripting languages, but I think it was relaxed quite some time ago. But you need to try and see if they kind of like you go through it. Because with JavaScript, the loophole there was that people use their own, Apple's runtime. And then it wasn't like some third-party scripting language, it was like their runtime. And if they have bug in their runtime, well, they will deploy a new version of iOS with a new runtime. And the argument against other scripting languages in the past was that, well, they can't touch your Erlang implementation. So, but I think this was relaxed some years ago. So you shouldn't have problems, but you might have them.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything yet. I think trying it is the best way to go there. Again, I would really like to do something like with the to-do app, but I think it's too simple. If you guys see someone who has like a nice app that would be cool to have for mobile, then I would love to take something that is live view already and just port it to mobile and try to ship that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering about the limitations around this instance being not where it's spawning, basically. I mean, in the sense of, is that able to run schedulers per threads or the cores of the mobile phone is running, or what would happen if not crashes in those kind of scenarios, basically? Because like it's basically running in a different environment that it is assumed, right?
Yeah, it's running in a different environment than it's assumed. That's a good question. Erlang is really not assuming a lot, so that's cool. It has assumptions in there that I mentioned about having executables that it can use as helpers, but it was actually just really a few changes that had to be made to make it work without those. And apart from that, like the schedulers, they seem to work wonderfully well. One issue I had is that the JIT doesn't work right now on iOS. But I guess that's something fixable. It's just about the assembler instructions. So right now the builds that we are doing are without that. There's another repo, I didn't mention it here, that's an Elixir desktop. It's called runtimes. And that is just a CI to build those runtimes and package them for iOS and for Android. And so this is where we're building them. So you can also go there and grab the most recent. But there you will find the disabled JIT.
You mentioned Erlang being a single log. Do you mean just the static library of Erlang and all the needs, or do you also package all the Beam files into the same log?
No, it's only like the native executable. So the Beam files are packaged into a zip file, an app.zip, and that zip file is on first start. The native application checks, is the zip file I have here different than last time I started up? And if yes, then it extracts all the Beam files, and then it's good to go. There is one of the tricky parts was to get Erlang to start up without using all these wrapper scripts. So when you start, for example, a release, there's a shell file, and that shell file calls another shell file, and that calls another shell file. And they create more and more environment variables until they start Erlang. And then I had to go backwards, see like what's that final state that they're building, and recreate that. And once you recreate that, you can actually start Erlang. And that's actually visible. That's visible here, but I don't see my pointer. My mouse pointer is gone, so I cannot show you. No, I can seriously not see my mouse pointer. That's back. Oh, I can see it. There you go. So this is basic. There's like construction of a long list of arguments that we're doing here, where we give this root and a router and proc name. This is all command line arguments basically that are being constructed in an array, and then we use those arguments to start Erl start, which is in fact an Erlang function that's like in the binary image. That plus some environment variables that are also being placed, like the binder environment variable, for example, needs to be there. If that's not there, Erlang says like I don't start. Figuring that out was kind of tricky, but after that it works.
Do you still root like the entire OTP for the apps?
Yeah, it's the entire OTP. It's the entire OTP. It boots quite quickly. There is still optimization possible for sure. One simple optimization is to use the interactive mode instead of the embedded. So OTP has two different ways of starting up. If you run a server like a Phoenix app on your server, embedded is often good because it means it will take all the Beam files and pre-compile and preload them. And so the very first request is going to be quick. But on mobile, the caveat is if you have tons of Beam files and maybe some of them are not even being used, it will go through all of them first before it shows anything. And so we changed that back to interactive, which you use usually in development only. But then the startup is quicker because you really want to see that the app is coming up quickly.
how Mix project looks like inside of Xcode project?
I have no idea because I have a hard time getting friends with Xcode and with Max, but but there's Visual Studio Code, and so this, as I showed you in the run Mix in the script, we basically just open a normal Elixir project, and so I just use Visual Studio Code to edit the project that lies within, and then you make any changes to that project and you run your iOS app again. So the most used feature of Xcode for me is the run button. You know, like that's why I open it.
The script inside of Xcode starts the Mix project and handles it. Okay.
Exactly. That's here. This is just the Mix project is actually inside the Elixir app subdirectory. And that is just a complete normal. That's actually the sample app. That's a very simple app here. So
okay. I think Mix devs get that is essential.
It's just a subdirectory in that moment, and then we fetch that.
All right. Thanks.
Cool.
I can see that you're pushing the boundaries. What do you want to make in YouTube? Is just a fun project to work on? I'm sure pushing boundaries is always hard. Has a lot of friction.
Yeah, well, we use we really do that for our project. So our project is a diode. It's like a Web3 application. That means we use like all the application logic is really on the client side, and so we have started on the on like machines, and then we desktop machines, and we needed to have a UI, and then we had the UI and went with Elixir Desktop there, and then we realized we also need that on the mobile phone. But there's actually a lot of code. Internal code and cryptographic code. It's connected to blockchain technology. So there's a lot of code that we had that we were wondering, like, how can we port all of that to iOS and Android? And so we took the way of the least resistance, and that was get OTP run on iOS and Android. And this is where we're pushing it further. So actually our app is completely written in Elixir, and we're actually having ported it to Android and iOS now. And we're using this to do it. And every time I have time, then I'm updating the open source projects to fit that, because really I want it to be there, and I wanted other people to use it in the hope that other people use it and contribute back, and this grows larger, and at some point is something where I also get things from that I didn't put in myself.
It's very interesting that that's the way of the least resistance, but
yeah, well, it's for a small team. It's really hard, but because basically, if you don't do that, you need to have an Android team and an iOS team in addition. And I don't know, like I have two hands, and I have to do 3 desktop applications. It's like if you're a larger organization, for sure you can move faster if you have like 100 people, and then you can put on each of these 5 platforms 25 people. You wouldn't wonder about a cross-platform thing, right? Like why? But I don't have that. We have to work with.
I'm happy that you're small, so you can do it.
So there is a live book, the recent release in the Elixir community. So how do you see? Would it be possible to bring live book to iOS with this library?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. I think so. I think so. People are working on that even.
Okay.
I think so.
I have a question regarding the sort of end-user experience, because many non-native apps that are based on the JavaScript, well, they feel like apps based on JavaScript, and for not small part because they're sluggish. So, do you have any kind of experience, like especially like working with your app, not the example app, but the real app? How well do they perform on the iOS? I mean, on the one hand, there isn't that much JavaScript in live view. But on the other side, well, you still have to go through like the sockets and do more work than an actual native app. So
yeah, it's a good question. I think that there's probably like real differences when you do a lot with videos and animations, I guess. Now, in our app, it's a productivity app, so we don't have that. But I imagine if you would try to do Instagram or TikTok via this approach, you would probably run into performance issues, because you basically have like 2 layers, right? You have a web browser, and then you have videos behind that, and you don't have direct access.
I mean like more simple things like if you just like have a lot of buttons in the context on a non-native app, like they will start reacting slower to your flashes than if it's like a native app. So do you do like any benchmarks, like how much UI you can put into the browser before it starts being sluggish?
No, we haven't done that yet. So our application has actually way too many buttons at the moment, but so I did not run into this problem yet. I did not think about that just the amount of buttons or something would change it.
The amount of buttons is just like a made up thing, but I remember like in let's say around 2010, it was like non-native apps were more popular than now, and quite a few of them like they just didn't feel good.
Yeah, there's even in the Elixir space, there's some really interesting projects. A guy was writing me because he's doing building from HTML, basically native components. So he's saying like using live view, and the live view is sending over HTML or like actually XML in that case, but he's using that as instructions to build native components. And you could use that in the very same architecture to do that on device as well. And then you actually get the performance of native components. I think that's a path that you can go. And then maybe it's kind of React Native or something. But I think probably the evolution that I see more is like as a small company with few resources, you want to do something that's cross-platform. And this is going to give you the best value for the buck, I think. And then once you grow larger, the next step is really go Swift native. I think all these kind of intermediaries, I don't know that the added value is so big, right? Instead of just going fully native. There's for sure a difference, but inside the app so far, it's really nice. The visuals make a difference, right? We have to ensure that the visuals fit the platform. And the boot up time, there's still something we can work on. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to model, let's say that we have actually running a production application with live view, and we are serving it through the browsers. And we want to also serve them from the iOS by using this library or this interface. Then we have an existing code base, but the live view probably accessing our context functions or reaching the database. I was thinking how to easily map that, share most of the functionality with that live view application. So did you have any kind of experience with that?
That's tricky, obviously. It's tricky. So if you have an application that you can take by itself and move it over, it's actually pretty easy to migrate the databases if you work with Ecto, because now there's SQLite, which is Ecto compatible, and it's an SQLite database that runs on device. Our application is doing the same. The sample application is doing the same. So I didn't mention that, but in the iOS and the Android build that we ship by default, that's in the sample app, SQLite, the NIF is built in, because I think for any application you build on a phone, you need some kind of storage, and having a database storage is quite convenient. You can also use DATs, of course, but or just files, but this is just on board. We're shipping it there already. We're building that.
Didn't you try to use the SQLite that ships with iOS?
Yeah, we're not using that. I was thinking about that, but then it would change so much of the context that you have to adapt to that. And this way you can just keep all your thoughts within Elixir, and you don't have to think about how does it the iOS part behaves differently. But what I wanted to add is to going from a server app to a native app. One thing that I think is really interesting for this kind of native apps is the offline first part of it, where you say maybe it doesn't have the authoritative data set because that's on the server, but at least I can open the app and I can show you all the data that you looked at last. And even if you're offline right now, you still have access to all the data. And then if there is connectivity, you sync with that backend database up in the cloud. I think that's really neat.
Would it be possible to connect the node working in the mobile phone to the actual server?
It is possible, but you should not do that, right? Because you get root access basically on both sides, right? So the server can send any command to the node, and the node can send any command to that. There's no way in Erlang you can restrict that, where you can just spawn a process doing whatever you want. Like once you ship that, I would shut down your server, because some guy playing around with the mobile app, getting the cookie, he can send your server like rm-rf, like all directories. Cool. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I will. Thank you so much. I didn't check whether there's any questions in Discord, so I'm just gonna shut this down. Otherwise, as I said, I'm usually in Slack. Just reach out there to me, and I'm happy to answer all kind of questions.